Mr. Rohit Vyas, welcome again to ITV Gold. It's great to have you the next day as well.
Thank you.
Of course, we have so much to discuss with you. A lot is going on. We still don't have any final results on the election, so let's get right into it. I'd first like to discuss some of these states that we're talking about right now, where the swing states are playing a huge role in this election. Let's quickly talk about Arizona. Why do you think Arizona is turning blue right now?
I think I gave you an answer to that yesterday. I think my guess was it's because of the comments that the president has made during his term against Senator John McCain, who is the son of Arizona and who is a war hero, in fact, and who ran for president himself, extremely popular figure. So I think that's one reason. The other reason in Arizona, as I explained yesterday, and again, I'd like to reemphasize for your viewers' understanding of this, is the demographics that have shifted in that state. A lot of the Latino vote, for instance, a lot of the Latinos have moved from California, which used to be their home, because of the situation with the housing crisis over there. So they all moved over to Arizona and have made that their new home. It's the neighboring state of California, and I think the changing demographics have made the big difference in this election. It's still largely a red state. I think it would have continued to be red. It still is. At this point, we still don't know whether it's going to go to Joe Biden or it's going to remain with the Republicans and by that virtue, Donald Trump. But at this stage, it looks like it may turn blue. We don't know. Incidentally, I believe Nevada and Arizona have both told journalists at their two respective news conferences by their secretaries of state and election officials that they will not finish counting about 250,000 votes total till tomorrow, maybe the end of Friday, they say.
Oh, wow.
And as I explained yesterday, some states have been talking about going all the way into Tuesday, namely Pennsylvania, even Georgia. The executive in charge of elections in that state came out with a news conference later this afternoon, actually, just a few minutes before we're speaking here, saying that he didn't think their count would finish either, probably go in till tomorrow. And if necessary, they'll all, go on till Sunday, if they have to, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday.
Wow.
So we'll see. But Arizona, I think it's demographics, and I think it's also the comments that were made against, the senator. Yeah.
You just mentioned Nevada and Georgia. The race is very, very close in Georgia. Quite surprising, quite shocking. What are your opinions on it?
On say that again?
On Georgia.
Georgia.
The race is so close. It's shocked a lot of people across the nation.
Yeah, it's because in Georgia, like the rest of the country, we had the pandemic. So we all had the option, and many of us were actually told this would be the best and safest way, and the only way to vote. Only if you had to vote at the polling booths, you vote in person. So they're all the mail-in ballots. There are hundreds of thousands of them going to all the states throughout the country. Those are still being counted in these 5 or 6 states, which are still up for, are the key swing states right now. And these states simply are not used to counting so many ballots. Pennsylvania, I believe, said that they would have about November 3rd was the election day. They had about 3 days after that to continue to accept ballots coming in by mail or by, going to the booths, etc. Not the booths, but the deposit boxes in their counties, etc. And so once that was complete, they could then continue counting. Much of the delay in Georgia has been specifically because of the mail-in ballots. And that's taking time. The state machinery simply is not used to having such an overwhelming number of mail-in ballots or absentee ballots come in that they now have to sit and physically open them up, count them, scan them, make sure they're in the system, the votes get registered. If they don't get registered, look at the ballots physically, figure out why it's not registering, why it's not scanning, etc. Even come to a decision if the ballot is valid or not valid. Lots of those things coming into play, and they're simply not used to it.
Do you think Georgia could turn blue?
It could. It technically could, because right now they're waiting for the ballot count, the vote count from the urban centers. Okay, Atlanta, that region, some of the urban counties in Georgia, which could make the big difference. Those are heavily Democratic, they believe.
Right.
So it could make a big difference and switch Georgia, which has traditionally been a Republican state. It could flip it, and it could turn blue. But that'll depend on how many of the ballots have come in, how many indeed were mailed in by Democrats as opposed to Republicans, because there are Republicans who have also mailed in their votes, namely senior citizens who chose not to go to the ballots not to go to the polling stations because of the COVID-19 risk.
Wow. And looking at Michigan, were you surprised that it turned blue?
Yes and no. Yes and no. But again, the same thing over there. The same thing. That's an area where I had been predicting, talking about if some of the promises they believed were not being met, the promises made by President Trump in his 2016 campaign, then they would go blue. Because for them, it's a pocketbook issue. If you feel that things are not good at home, you don't have enough food to lay on the table for your family, if you're a male worker or even a female worker, a single mom, for instance, and if you think you can make it and that promises were not kept, you're going to go the other way. You're going to choose the alternative. So, yes, I was surprised, and no, I wasn't surprised, because eventually the elections are all about how much money the American public feels they have in their pocket, in their savings banks, to secure their futures.
Did you expect us to be at this place at this time for this election? We're in day 3 of counting, and there is still such a tight race. Were you expecting it?
Yes, absolutely. If you remember, you asked me this question about whether the polls were right, and the polls were, what the polls were saying in the last few interviews we've had. And I told you all along, I did not believe the polls. And as you can see for yourself right now, in fact, the New York Post today had a great headline. It said something to the effect like pundits, wrong, pollsters, wrong, something else, wrong. Essentially, everybody, the media, wrong. It said everybody who was trying to predict these elections were all entirely wrong. And I told you from the outset, and I said it in 2016, I do not believe the polls. The old school journalists, we have our ear to the ground. We go out there, we talk to people, we meet people, or you engage in a conversation, or you wait and you listen to people. That's what I still do as a reporter. I go out there, I listen to people. If I go to a convenience store and I see a bunch of people talking, I listen to them. I get a cup of coffee, listen to them, maybe join in, get an idea. That's real polling, okay? Today's polling is all done by telephone, which half people don't respond to telephone calls. I don't think you do, I don't, because most of them are scam calls. They also judge it based on conversations with each other.
Right.
So absolutely, I had a feeling this race would be very, very tight, because all said and done, President Trump did get out a fantastic turnout in the last days before the election day. And if you saw his public rallies, people like to see their candidate out front, out in public. I think the Democrats, for them, it was a slight strategic error, in my opinion, to try to do so much of distancing, even though it's the safest and the most prudent thing to do. Because I think Donald Trump knew that he can regale in the person-to-person contact. But I still expected this race to be very, very tight because of the issues before us.
You just mentioned President Donald Trump, and I have to ask you, he is looking extremely angry. He's gone on Twitter and has said, stop counting the vote, stop the count. His campaign is already suing. There are lawsuits that are happening while we're speaking.
Yeah.
Do you think this will, I know I asked you that yesterday, is this going to go to the Supreme Court, you think, at this point?
No.
And also,
no, first, yeah, that's a good question. I want to answer this because a lot of people don't seem to understand when President Trump says, I'm going to go to the Supreme Court. He cannot go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, here's the role of the Supreme Court. You first go to the lower courts. In any case, you go to the lower courts. It then goes to an appellate court. If you're not satisfied with the appellate court in your state, you go to a superior court. If you're not satisfied with the judgment, or you want to challenge a judgment of the superior court, you then go to another appellate court, and then eventually the Supreme Court of a state. If the Supreme Court of a state rules a certain way, you disagree, you want to challenge it, you then go to the United States Supreme Court. So it's a long, long road to going to the Supreme Court. In the case of an election, it doesn't just happen that you say we want to call a halt to voting, okay, in any election. It is very unlikely, in my experience, that a judge, even at the lower court level, is going to just halt the elections unless you provide evidence of distinct, visible fraud. If you do, and a judge is satisfied that there's something going wrong here, there is deliberate manipulating, etc., only then can a judge order a halt to counting. And then the ballot area is immediately secured, etc. But otherwise, no, he cannot just go to the Supreme Court that's something he's been saying, he's incorrect. You can't just go up to the Supreme Court, even if you're the president, and say, I want you to halt the vote or the counting or whatever.
What kind of a message does it send when you have the president of this country not show support in the election system, the security of elections? He's called for voter frauds in the states that Vice President Biden is leading. I'm just trying to understand, what is he trying to say across the nation?
Okay, first of all, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt on this. Again, I want to emphasize I'm bipartisan, as you know. I am an independent registered voter. I'm not with either party, etc. And because I'm a journalist, I keep myself totally middle of the road. The mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, have long been an issue in the elections in the United States. Very many people choose not to mail in ballots. For instance, in New Jersey, we have the option to mail in now our ballots if we choose. That's aside from this election. From the last election on, we could do it. I chose to send in my ballots by mail. But there are many people who are very suspicious of that method. Not just the president of the United States, but many people who are suspicious. Because the thinking is, okay, you send that ballot out. Now, how do you know that somebody in the election office is not going to just pick it up, toss it away, and who's going to see that person, etc.? Those doubts do exist. They've been lingering for many, many years. So he might be within his rights to be suspicious as an individual, as a person who's running as a candidate. But I think for the 99% majority of the time, there's never any cause for suspicion with the election process. And so that's just his personal opinion, where he thinks there could be fraud, etc., because he thinks he's going to sweep it. And if he doesn't believe, if he believes that his sweep that he thought would happen is not going to happen, then he voices what he feels.
If you were, say, Joe Biden, at this point, what will be your strategy in handling this wait time?
Nothing. Being quiet, taking it easy. I think he did very well when he came out and spoke. I believe it was yesterday AM sometime. He first spoke on election night. Well, the early morning after, about 2 o'clock or something in the morning. And I think what he sought to do was to reassure the public. Yesterday when he spoke, he came out to say that all trends his party believed looked good for them. And what he wanted to do immediately, and I think what he was doing was having his eye out for any possible, trouble, protests and the like around big cities and other places in the country. Whoever would be outraged or whatever the outcome would be, he wanted to first assuage public opinion, say, don't worry, all the rhetoric should be left behind us. If I win, for instance, he said, I will be a president of the United States, not of the blue states, not of the red states, but of the United States. That was very good. Right now, I think all candidates should just lie low, wait for the counting process to be complete, because that's the American way. That's our democracy here in the United States. We wait for the count to be complete, and then you can stake your claim to power or to victory.
How are you looking at this massive turnout of voting? Do you think we have voted enough this year?
Oh yeah, this is a record in the history of the United States. 80% of the electorate has voted. It's never 100% from the time they've kept records about elections. It's never 100%. This was 80% of the electorate, which is fantastic. That's the estimate. It might turn out it was about 85% once they receive all the ballots by mail. For instance, we might find out that 85% of the eligible electorate did vote in this election.
Wow.
And I think that speaks to the issues that people feel strongly about. That speaks to how every citizen realized the value of that vote this time and what's at stake for them on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat. For them, this was the election of a lifetime. And those who didn't want Biden, they turned out in huge numbers. It's evident in person. Those who didn't want Trump sent in their ballots via mail or going in person to county offices, election offices, to the booths that were set up for collecting such, hand-in ballots, drop ballots, etc. And I think that speaks to the electorate getting very mature and feeling very strongly about issues.
President Trump's supporters yesterday protested outside an election office in Arizona. and there were a lot of people at that protest. Meanwhile, there's a bunch of other protests going around in the nation. Do you think a lot of this is trying to intimidate the election office while the race is coming so close?
It could be. It could also be just emotions. I mean, those in Arizona, for instance, had come in armed. In Arizona, it's legal to carry a gun.
Right.
Open carry is pretty much a policy in that state. But there were, marshals and all the rest who were securing the polling area. I saw that on television, as you probably did last night. Most of those people were just angry, voicing their opinions, but there wasn't any sign of violence, I didn't think. In fact, the protests around the country, that some of the others we've seen, there was some in New York, I believe, at Union Square
Right.
in New York City. There was some in Chicago. There was some in Philly. There was some in Washington, D.C. as well. But by and large, all of them very peaceful. I think for that, you have to congratulate Joe Biden for calling for calm. You also have to some degree, congratulate, President Trump for not having gone out there and tried to appeal to his base in any way and riled them all up. I think both have been very restrained, and I think that was a good sign. And I think people are just waiting for the count to happen. Now, what happens after the count and after the final release of, results, we'll see. But I'm sort of optimistic now. I don't think there's going to be any trouble unless some troubled groups, infiltrate these
Right.
marchers and these protesters and try to stir up trouble deliberately.
If there are riots or a backlash in that sense, where is it going to come from?
Nobody can tell. It could come from anywhere. And that's what I'm talking about, troublemakers.
Right.
Because I think by and largely, the vast majority of people on both sides of the aisle, they're not out there to fight and to beat each other up or anything like that. Of course, a spark always leads to a fire. But that spark, who's going to create that spark? That's the whole thing. But I don't think there's going to be any such trouble. And as I've explained to you on the show, and I think I did so yesterday as well, law enforcement is well on top of it. Now, there's another thing that can play into all of this. And I've been saying that also, is there's a lot of misinformation, much of it directed from outside the United States, from foreign powers that are interested one way or the other for this election to go one way or the other, who are trying to manipulate the social media, WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter. Okay, they're trying to get out there, send all these false messages
Right.
with false figures that actually a million votes have disappeared, 100,000 votes have mysteriously appeared. All that is nonsense. And the FBI, well in advance of these elections, had warned the public not to pay attention to any of this misinformation that will be out there playing very heavily. So I think it'll just be a spark if something happens, but law enforcement is ready for it.
Yeah, here's to hoping nothing really happened and it's just peaceful as much as it can be. I just have a few questions left for you here. While I have you here, I have to ask you, we're still in a pandemic. There are a lot of people that are suffering. There's a huge economic crisis in the country. We have stopped talking about the stimulus package. Do you think right after the election that needs to be the target of the House and the Senate?
Actually, yes, saw a report that Mitch McConnell already assuming that they're going to gain the majority in the Senate. There are still 5 seats up as we speak, which are undecided. It could go either way. My feeling is the Republicans will retain the majority in the Senate, which is not good news for a Biden administration because now he has to negotiate with the Republicans for anything. I do think that Mitch McConnell and everyone else, whoever's in power, will want to now bring up a new relief package. And I heard with the reports we've been getting is that Mitch McConnell, the majority leader in the Senate, is of course is working on it already. He's trying to get some figures in to get a relief package out. We've also, as we speak today, the Federal Reserve the minutes of their meeting yesterday have been released. And the Federal Reserve has left the interest rates at 0 to 0.25% because the economy is nowhere near pre-pandemic levels. So that means the economy is sputtering. Everyone knows if there is not another relief package for businesses, for states, for individuals, for families, the economy is in deep, deep trouble. So I think nobody wants that. They do want to solve the issues now that the election is behind us. Hopefully the presidential results will be behind us. They will work on it, yes.
And finally, I'd like some of your predictions on some of the states. So I'm just going to start with Arizona. Who do you think is going to win it?
You're asking me a tough question because then everybody's going to hold me to it. I have a feeling it's going to go to Biden.
Okay. Let's move on.
I hope I'm right. We'll
what-
see. I mean, I hope I'm right only because I'm making a prediction. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And I think you're just doing your best. You're just analyzing
Yeah.
all the numbers coming in just like we are. What about Nevada?
Nevada, also the same thing. I think it'll go to Biden.
Georgia?
Georgia may or may not. Georgia is hard. I think it stands a chance of staying red, and that's Trump. Mhm.
What about North Carolina?
North Carolina, possibly with Biden.
And finally, Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania is the toss-up.
Yeah.
This will depend on the votes coming out. It will be incredible if Biden gets it, but he has many paths to getting the 270 electoral college votes.
Right.
As of now, it could be he'll get it, and that because Philadelphia is a big Democratic area, those votes are coming in, being counted, the mail-in ballots, etc., and that could move it in his direction. If that happens, if Pennsylvania gets it, I'm not going to really guess Pennsylvania, by the way. I appreciate the question, but there I think it's too risky for me to guess because it could just switch around somewhere or the other one way. Plus, the Trump campaign has already asked for a halt to counting over there.
Right.
So it really could go somewhere else. And if they find a whole bunch of votes that have not yet been accounted for, it might swing.
Yes, for sure.
But I think if Biden gets it, he then gets a bigger majority of electoral college votes, much more than the 270.
If Biden gets Pennsylvania, he would win the election right now because he's
Right now, he
standing
would.
at
253,
253. Yes.
20 would take him to 273. Then he doesn't
Exactly.
even need the other states. Yes.
And
And that's why President Trump and the Trump campaign are concentrating so much on making sure, because for President Trump, that's really his only path with 214.
Right.
That is his major path to getting to that magic number. So for him, everything is at stake right now over there.
But
But I also want to point out
Yes.
that no matter what, this is something to educate your viewers if we have a moment, is that even if President Trump loses the presidency, as long as the Republicans are there in the Senate, controlling the Senate, Trump is going to be in charge from outside. Now, this is a very interesting thing I'm saying and a very controversial thing I'm saying, but he can still be in charge because he has tremendous influence over the Republican Party. It's become his Republican Party, and he's there. Also, a lot of people may not know this, he can always run for a second term in office the next time around, which is 2024. So he won't just disappear, in my opinion. Some people are saying he'll disappear and go away and go back into business. I'm not so sure. I think he'll still be around for a while.
For sure. May I ask you one follow-up question? Which states do you believe President Trump cannot lose at this point?
Pennsylvania. He cannot lose it. And if he loses Pennsylvania, it's pretty much over,
Wow. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Rohit Vyas. It's always a pleasure having you here.
Likewise. Thank you very much.